Welcome to the One Thing webinar, where every month we are joined by a best-selling author to talk about something that they've written a book that really aligns with the one thing. How many of you out there have read the one thing? If you've read the one thing, push yes, press yes in the question box. And if you haven't, put a question mark. Yes, twice. Awesome. Well, the reason we are joining you today, so this is the one thing, and on page 114 of the one thing, we have what are called the seven circles, and they are all the areas of your life. See that? We've got your spiritual life, your physical health, your personal life, key relationships, your job, your business, your finances. And in each area of our lives, there are areas that there is one thing we can do that makes everything else easier or unnecessary. And as we live in this modern world, one of the things that many people are challenged by is how to stay present in the moment. We are surrounded by so many distractions and inbox notifications and buzzes from our phone. Who can relate to that feeling? If yes, put yes in the questions box. Yeah, very much so. So we are joined by, he is the host of Astral Hustle. He is a sound engineer, and he's the author of this new book called Now is the Way. So hold that thought, guys. We're joined today by Corey Allen, and he's gonna appear momentarily. Hooray! How are you doing, Corey?
Good. How are you?
So Corey, tell us a little bit about your practice and what you brought together in this book.
About my meditation practice or
Yes, your spiritual practice.
okay. Yeah, I mean
Start at the
basically
beginning.
basically been meditating for about 20 years and I got into it, out of necessity really. I living in an environment where just how I grew up, there was a lot of chaos and discomfort around me, and I really discovered meditation by chance and um, began practicing just quietly. And I realized that no matter what was going on outside of my body, in the world or in my environment, that inside my body, my inner life was mine, and that I could do and become who and what I wanted to be in there. And it became become very much a sanctuary for me. And as I went deeper into my own meditation practice and just exploring and becoming aware of my inner life, I began to see how, as I made changes with what arose and what I became aware of, I changed as a person. There's this thing of what's coming in and what's coming up, and how I began to express that in the world began to slowly morph who I was. And that made me realize, like, wait a second, now 3 months have gone by, 6 months have gone by, and I've continued meditation practice and just trying to be more mindful and more self-aware and trying to author my actions and my future as opposed to being pushed around and by the life outside of me, or just living mindlessly through my pre-programmed behaviors that have come from my family and from society and so on. The more I did that, the more I realized, like, wow, I'm actually at the head of the ship here. I'm curating and choosing who I want to be and changing who I was into the person that I know is possible. And so through doing that, I began realizing, I'm different than I was 6 months ago. I'm different than I was a year ago. And that led me to realizing, like, oh wow, I can continue this path and continue changing forever. And that's ultimately what I'm still doing today.
It's interesting because a lot of people, when they start on a path of personal development, we have a lot of people in our community who say, I want to achieve this, and this is the person I want to become. And I've heard that sometimes there are a lot of things that we think are the first two-inch domino that helps people. Like, I want to be healthy and I want to lose weight. So they think that the first thing to do is start working out every day. But recently I was talking to somebody, and his first two-inch domino, he realized, was getting his mind present. And it seemed like so detached from the outcome he was actually seeking. But that presentness actually does ripple into all the other areas of your life, like you mentioned.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you think about, like, everything that you do in your life begins by a level of self-awareness or an awareness of what you need to change or a definition of the goal that you want to seek or whatever it might be. And so through being more present, you're more aware of what you're feeling, you're more aware of what you're thinking, and you begin to get a broader, more clear idea of of the small picture and the big picture, and that really allows you to recognize what it is that you're thinking at all. It's interesting that a lot of people get aspirations to do things in life, and they get really frustrated because they're not coming into fruition. But if you stop and you actually think about how much time have you spent really visualizing and laying out a strategy and understanding what that even means to achieve that thing, most people say, oh, well, I haven't really done that. I just want a thing and I'm frustrated because I can't get it. And so, spending some time to actually increase that self-awareness and your understanding of what it is you've decided to, like the story that you're telling yourself about your life and
Yeah.
about what you want. Like, well, what is that story? Where did that story come from? And what parts of that story are true and do I actually want? And so by being more present, you can very much tap into that. And it's a beautiful thing, and it becomes more and more clear as you do it more.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talk about like having a goal outside of yourself that you're after. And then people, though, on the inside in their day to day, they continue to react to what the world is throwing at them versus having a plan for how to get and achieve that goal. And one of the
Mhm.
things you mentioned in your book was how sometimes we get so caught up in the day to day of checking email and responding to this notification and that firefight that, that we are so caught up in the busyness, but that moment that we actually realize that we're not present in the moment is actually the first 2 inch domino of being self aware. Like,
Mhm.
even though you haven't changed your behavior, but you're just pausing and you're noticing that your behavior is not in line with what's actually happening in your present. It's just reacting to everything outside of yourself. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I would love to. So this is such an important thing. I love that you brought it up, and we should kind of soak on this thought for a minute because, um, yeah, our culture is, we live in a capitalist culture that's all based upon marketing and advertising and all this stuff. And a symptom of that is that from the time that we're born, we're marketed to that if you had this, you will be happy. If you could look like this person or look this way or be this thing, you'll feel happy. And what that does is it makes us feel like we aren't enough. It makes us feel like perhaps we're missing something, we're wrong in some way. And given that we already have nasty inner critics to begin with as human critters, but being living in this world where there's just marketing and advertising everywhere telling us like here's what you should be, like everywhere,
Yeah.
it makes it hard to not second guess yourself and beat yourself up all the time. And so yes, it's a such a powerful moment to realize like that first huge step is like just becoming aware of your thoughts, as you mentioned. That's the first step. And what happens is that most people, when they sit down to try and meditate, or even you don't even need to do meditation to experience mindfulness. Meditation is just a part of it. But whenever you sit down, you're doing something and you think, um, hmm, I just I'm becoming more aware of my thoughts, of what I'm thinking, of what I'm feeling, but it seems too crazy, and so I want to go back to numbing it, or I want to kind of ignore it and live in a series of chain reactions or this momentum of distraction. That moment of recognition, yeah, is usually one where people do have that thought, that experience of like, oh, I'm doing something wrong, or this is nasty, and I don't want to experience this because of the way that our society and just the natural way that humans tend to think about things is. And so I think it's super valuable to point out that once you recognize the busyness of your mind, that's actually a huge win. That's the hardest win because you've gone 30 years, 50 years, 60 years kind of on autopilot in some ways until that moment. It's a huge breakthrough.
Yeah. So you have this breakthrough, but then what? I feel like that's where people suddenly, I think you're right that you have the awareness, but it's much easier to slip back into other behaviors that numb and that distract you because distractions are really easy to take up time and fill space and feel busy and important. So what do
Mhm.
you think are the habits that people have unconsciously been forming that make it easy to slide back into that lack of awareness versus to be present in the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything that's fed to us constantly, like even just watching TV or, zoning out on Netflix or whatever. Of course, the phone and social media is a huge distraction. Careerism is another form of distraction. Different substances and what have you. There's all sorts of ways that our, um, our society is just prepared to really take advantage of all of those pain points that we have. And
Yeah.
so, uh, you know, I think the best way to get on the other side of that and start and start shifting things for yourself long term is one, to realize that like you're not going to decide that tomorrow, like you're going to go to sleep tonight and then tomorrow you're going to wake up and everything's going to be amazing. You're going to be a completely different person. And because that's what most people tend to get the idea in their head is they want like a results fast. They want to change quickly because they're in so much pain or because they feel so disconfigured or whatever it might be. But the most important thing is to like with all of this stuff, and I think with most stuff in general, is like lower the stakes. It's like don't make it this huge thing where if you say, "Oh, I'm going to meditate," or "I'm going to try and not say any judgmental things out loud," or express some negativity or whatever, or criticize strangers or whatever it might be. If you do it one time or you catch yourself doing it, like it's the game isn't over. It's like, okay, well, you caught yourself doing it. That's great. That's a win. Like you recognize
Yeah.
that you were doing it as opposed to just, doing it, and then moving on with your life.
Mhm.
So, lowering the stakes and then just starting slow, one step at a time. And, in the book, I put like a good way to just begin to tap into what you experience as a person because, we have our consciousness, our awareness of our experience. But that comes with different levels of depth. Some days you might experience this path where you're going, and it's almost like you wake up, you go through this automated sort of day in existence, and then when your head hits the pillow at night, you're like, oh, what even happened today? I don't even really know. But then
Mhm.
sometimes you have those experiences where you feel completely blissed out. You feel like there's this synchronicity where everything is almost forming together just for you. You feel deep and connected to everything. You feel like that every moment of your experience, you're very in tune with, and you're responding to it, not just reacting to everything. And that's the place where everyone wants to be. The interesting thing is that that beautiful, space of grace truly is what that is that that's here all the time. Like it doesn't disappear when you're not feeling that. It's just that you're not tuned into it, you're not tapped into it in that moment. And so
Well,
finding
I
small
was going to
ways
ask
to.
our listeners, Corey. Sorry to
Mhm.
interrupt you. I
No, no
feel like
problem.
when you said that, it sort of sunk in for a minute, and I wanted to ask the people that are here, who's experienced that blissed out sort of when you feel very aware and aligned with the universe because you feel very present and noticing it. If you've ever felt that, put it in the question box. Say me. Yes. Oh my word. But a long time ago. Jeffrey says, of course. There's a lot of, oh, this is a great thing that Scott said. He said, I've felt that, but it often appears by accident. Like it feels like it shows up without any control over what I've put into the world. How would you respond to that, Corey?
Yeah, well, it definitely can. I mean, you think about all of just the circumstances of life will align. You think like a clock, like it's always going to be, the minute hand and the hour hand are going to be on top of each other a couple of times, at least once an
Yeah,
hour. And so it's
yeah.
kind of like that. I think that what you can take away from that experience is whenever you do feel that way, taking a little mental snapshot of that and going like, okay, this is where I need to spend more time. Like all of the static and buzzing and distraction and the endless cycle of desire and franticness, like let me use this as the goal, the place to get. And that's really useful because, a lot of people it's hard to get somewhere if you don't know where you're going in the first place. So using
Yeah.
those little wonderful moments as like, all right, this is this is where it's at. This is what life should be. This is being fully alive. So I know where to point myself.
So that kind of aligns with what do you think are the myths that maybe people think about mindfulness? Like those moments that they're like a gift that maybe is given that I don't have any control over, or are there other myths that people talk about that make mindfulness maybe out of reach or maybe out of that maybe make it feel out of control?
Yeah, there's a lot of them, I mean, it's like because it's dealing with the mind, it's intangible. And so it's this thing that's within you, right? There's no fit, like you can go to the gym and work out and measure your biceps and be like, cool, I'm like gaining, bicep size,
Yeah.
whatever. But whenever you're changing your inner life, you have to become aware and like, okay, how am I feeling today? Like, how is my awareness different? And that's a whole nother ball game. And so with that comes a lot of, but there's a lot of potential for imagination or self-delusion or whatever it might be. So there's a lot of misnomers and a lot of fat in that world that people can kind of get caught up in. And so some of the definite ones that I hear a lot are like people think that it's going to change who you are or like somehow um, the I, how you understand yourself will disappear or something like that. Like that you won't be the person that you were anymore, and that scares people, you know. Whenever really it's like what will happen is that you'll become more of who you are as opposed to less of who you are, you know.
I guess I can relate to that fear, Corey, and that like I think sometimes we define ourselves by a lot of the things we do and the things we keep ourselves busy with. So
Hmm.
that if you strip some of that away and just look at what's left, maybe it's an unfamiliar thing to look at, which can be
Right.
really scary.
Right, right. Yeah. And another one definitely is people think of like the idea of having a clear mind is something that I hear all the time that people it makes some people uncomfortable because they're like, what am I, a zombie? Like what's going on here? You know, I don't want to have no thoughts. And that idea of like a clear mind comes from a bad translation of an Eastern idea. You know, there's this idea of whenever you say, "Oh, well, I'm meditating or I'm practicing mindfulness, I have a clear mind," and doesn't mean that you have no thoughts. It means that you have an awareness about what's going on in your mind. You have clarity in your inner vision and in your inner life, as opposed to having just no thoughts and being this empty vessel
Yeah,
or something like that.
that makes sense. That makes sense. So when people experience those myths, how do you debunk that in your own world? I think that sometimes going on a mindfulness journey can feel intimidating because of those myths and the path that feels maybe inaccessible or
Hmm.
unclear. So where do
Yeah.
we start?
Yeah, well, I mean, always put yourself in the lab, stick a toe in. That's the best way because, as I said again, like given that it's a experience of the mind, you'll never know, what it's actually like, what it feels like unless you experience it for yourself. So just trying a little bit of those practices and really just getting a sense of what that's like for you is the best way to debunk those myths because you quickly realize it's like maybe before you went to a foreign country for the first time. People think like, oh, it's going to be scary and I'll be completely helpless and the language barrier is going to be insurmountable. But then whenever you finally go there, you're like, oh, I actually like this. This is more fun than being at home, you know. But until you
Yeah.
actually get there, are you like, oh, wait a second, this is fine. This is good, and then
Hmm.
you know what it's all about. And so I think that something like meditation. Again, people think like, oh, what does this mean? Is this some deep spiritual pursuit that's going to redefine who I am and all this stuff? And it's whatever you want it to be because it's you, right? And so for something like that, like people have this fear about meditation. I hear it all the time, is because of a lot of the things we mentioned, and there's a lot of like performance anxiety or something like that. People worry that they're doing it wrong and that they're failing, or that it's going to make them wear flowing clothing or something like that. Which that could be true only if that's who you really are, and it reveals itself as you go deeper into the undoing of who you were told you should be. But I would say if it's something like that, like again, just lower the stakes. We overcomplicate everything in life, and so just sitting down, like, all right, I'm going to try meditation, see what it's all about. You sit down for 5 minutes, after you go home from work or in the morning or whatever. Super easy. Just close your eyes, breathe in through your nose, breathe in life or whatever that means to you. Just breathe in something well. As you exhale, release the muscles in your face and your shoulders and relax. Breathe in again, breathe in more, life or just essence or whatever that means to you. And then again, exhale, relax your face, your shoulders, and whatever. Try not to move and be fidgety. Allow your hands to just relax and rest on your body. And just do that for 5 minutes without any, noise or sounds on in the background. And don't expect anything from it. Just say, all right, well, I'm going to do that. See what that's like. I use the phrase thing I came up with called breathe like you're sleeping, because everyone has this idea of like, oh, I can't take deep breaths and calm breaths. It's like, yeah, well, you do for 8 hours a night. It's just your mind isn't in the way, getting you all clenched up and grasped and freaked
Yeah.
out. So you can do it, easily when you're sleeping. So just do that when you're awake, for 5 minutes and see how you feel. Maybe you don't feel any different. But what you'll find is that the compound effects of doing that over a couple of days or a few weeks, if you do it every day, you'll start to notice that in situations where normally you would have just this reactive verbal response to something, or you might, make a decision without thinking about it, your impulse control or whatever it is, or even your own inner critic, where you go into a meeting or something like that, and you feel like, oh, I'm about to go fail this, and you can catch yourself going, wait a second, I actually feel a bit more just comfortable with what is. I feel a bit more confident and self-aware of myself and less less controlled by my past and my programming and my fears, and a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more comfortableness and flexibility.
It sounds like a dream. And I don't know if I'm special here, but I've tried to go on meditation journeys and tried to build a habit of it, and it's something that I can do in a reactionary way, where often I'll be like, I've got to get centered, and so when I feel that desire, it's much easier to fall into a pattern. But how do we I mean, who else out there has tried to go to build a meditation journey and has maybe struggled to build the habit of consistency? Anybody? Am I really that special?
No, it's everyone, trust me.
Yeah. So I guess how do we balance that? Like what is the smallest what do you suggest for someone like me who's really wants to be more present and continues to fight against that the busy factors and turning my mind down and
Right.
sitting still. I find that if I walk around the block, sometimes it's easier to turn my mind down than it is if I'm just sitting in a quiet room. So, what are the pro tips to make the barriers to that outcome? Because the outcome sounds dreamy, and the path there has, for me, has not been as always so clear.
Yeah, the first thing is to just build it into a part of your routine so that it becomes habitual. So, you don't have to
Mhm.
remember to brush your teeth in the morning, probably, I hope. And so,
Nope, nope,
you just kind of
got it.
you just always do that every morning. You didn't often, have to remember to take a shower. It's just you wake up, you make coffee, whatever, hop in the shower. It's all part of this routine. So just building it into there every morning, that's a great way to make it work, something that sticks. And, it takes a couple of days and you might miss a day or something like that, but the more that you start just putting it a part of just a no brainer, just no pun intended, but a no brainer, you just make it a part of your morning routine. That's a great way to start building it into your daily life. And then again, just making it really simple. Like you can make meditation complex if you want, but making it, don't even think about any inner life, any psychological outcome or anything like that. Think of it from a purely physiological, just physical state first. So I know that people that are probably listening to this webinar are professionals that are working long hours, that have a lot going on, a lot of complexity in their lives. And so because you're processing so much information every day, you need time to, like a computer, like defrag that information, to kind of detox all of that input. And so given that people that are working very busy schedules with a lot going on, there's no time. There's often no time to sit down and to actually release a lot of that stress and that tension and that complexity. And so whenever you finally do that, then it's like, man, it all comes out at once. And so doing it a little bit every morning, it's like we're like teapots that are full of steam, right? So in the morning, the first time you do it, you let it out. It's gonna be screeching. There's gonna be a lot of steam coming out, and your mind's gonna be really wild. You're gonna feel fidgety and all that. Then the second day, well, there's still a lot of steam in there, but not as much. And the third day, there's a little less steam. And over, a week, maybe 2 weeks, you're going to finally let all that steam out. And then you're just dealing with the pressures of the day as opposed to the pressures of all of your life from when you were born leading up until this moment, all coming out
Yeah,
now. So
that's a
there's this
lot.
there's this period of like blowing off some of that steam at first. But the fidgetiness and the mental franticness, the mind and the body very much mirror each other. And so once you, like, there's no win at meditating, right? Or in realigning yourself and
There's
getting
no
tapped in.
competitive meditation
There's no competitive
trophies.
meditation, right? So just knowing that, okay, so like you said, you guys struggle with it, you feel really frantic and fidgety and whatever.
Yeah.
So make it known, like, okay, that's how I feel whenever I do this. So I'm gonna sit down for 5 minutes. I may not instantly fast forward to a Zen master, immediately, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put in the time for myself right now. And then tomorrow I'll do it again. And just as I said, think about it completely from a physical state. All you're doing is you do it every night when you sleep. Like I said, you just do this while you're awake for 5 minutes. You sit there and you breathe, close your eyes for 5 minutes. No big deal. And so you probably, a lot of people will be walking through their house and they'll stop looking at their phone, Instagram or something in the middle of the hallway, like scrolling for 5 minutes, and they go, oh wait, I was going to the kitchen. It's
Yeah.
like you got 5 minutes. You can you
Yep.
turn that time into something productive. But then if you do it a second time, then it's like, okay, now I feel a little less fidgety. Again, don't even think about the mind. Let your mind go crazy. Let it just completely blow off all the steam, and just think about your chest rising, your chest falling as you exhale, chest rising when you inhale, and again as you exhale, relaxing the muscles in your face and your shoulders, and just think about the body. And what happens is that, given that our body is a reflection of the mind, like as a side note to kind of visualize that, think about the philosopher who is stroking his or her, well, not her beard, but his beard or her chin. And it's like, okay, they're in deep thought.
Yeah.
Or you think of the person that Gary Vaynerchuk, like, okay, he's crazy, or you can know where his mind is because of how animated he is, or something like that.
Mhm.
So that we have this body, mind connection. So as you're sitting there, you're breathing, you're just relaxing your body. Slowly, as you release and let some of that steam blow out, your mind will begin to mirror your body. And you'll find it much easier just through basic, even 5 minutes, as I said, for a couple of days, a week, 2 weeks in a row. You go, wait a second, I feel like I can relax and I can just be without having to fidget with something. You think about it from a neurophysiological or neuroplasticity way, the way that our common behaviors, our habitual behaviors that we do, it shapes the neural pathways of our brain. So in the modern world, we're always messing with our phone. We're always using a mouse, not the animal, but the digital, the keyboard mouse. We're always on our keyboard.
Yeah.
We're always doing something with our hands. We're on a remote using Netflix or whatever, always with the hands. And so our brain, grows these neural pathways to be like, okay, this animal needs, or this human critter needs to always be doing something with their hands at all times. So be ready, be focused on that, and be dialed in to always be fidgeting. So if you go to relax, then you're like, I need something. That's why, something like a fidget spinner became popular, is because
Yeah.
we're so hyper physically
Mm.
kind of hypnotized these days by how we interact with technology, that we're just always messing with something. And so it feels a little like you have almost like phantom limb syndrome whenever you try and relax at first, because I need to be messing with something, I need to be messaging, I need to be texting. But
Yeah.
you just, the more that you can do, just relax and breathe and give yourself that time, the more that'll start to melt away. And then what you'll find is that when you do that more and you go into your life, you go into your busy schedule, you go into the crazy succession of meetings or phone calls, whatever it might be, that edginess that you would normally feel from that fidgetiness of constant behavior has softened a little bit. And with that edginess, you gain more clarity and more precision in the way that you're able to show up in your professional life. You show up in a meeting, you show up being able to, like, all right, I've got these 10 appointments I need to do today or whatever. And you're able to do them with a lot more clarity and ease and less effort than you would whenever you had that edginess feeling.
Yeah, I think that edginess, sometimes there are behaviors that we've built to sort of make it easier. And one of the things in your book you talked about is, um, or not, to just soften that edge that don't actually work. It's like
Mm.
a false softening. And like checking my email all day long, trying to make sure that I'm on top of things, to make sure that I haven't missed anything. But you mentioned, like, how crazy would it be if I checked my physical mailbox as often as I check my electronic one? Like,
Yeah.
people would think I was bananas running to
Hmm.
the mailbox back and forth, thinking that something's going to arrive. And yet we've trained ourselves that that behavior is very socially acceptable. It keeps us busy. So what are some other sort of parallels like that, where the analogous behavior in our mental world versus our physical world can be very alarming?
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, email is the huge one. Social media, of course, is another big one. And just like refreshing, that's like another huge one with people, like, just like sitting around and refreshing. A friend of mine, I joke about, like, oh, let me see if I made it real quick. Let me refresh, as if there's going to be some big revelation that refreshing for the
Yeah.
90th time of the day, you know. And I think kind of breaking that spell is really valuable. And the way, for me, the creating barriers to those behaviors where you find yourself just ruminating on one thing like that over and over, trying to get that dopamine hit of, like, did I get any more likes? Did I get any more notifications or messages or emails or whatever? And really, like creating barriers to entry on that is really valuable. So if you're always like, first off, one great thing if you want is to just mix up the location of the apps on your phone screen, because think of how many times you just unlock your phone and your thumb hits Instagram or whatever the news feed or whatever your chosen digital distraction thing is of choice, and it's popping up and you're like, oh, I didn't even really remember opening this. I just opened it as as a force of
It's like
habit.
muscle memory.
Exactly. So if you move those apps around, you actually have to think about what you're doing, and that creates what I call in the book like the mindfulness gap. So you have this moment of self-agency where you go, "Oh, wait a second, what am I doing, and why am I doing this?" And then you're able to choose your behavior as opposed to living in this momentum of automated behavior. Another great one, what I do with social media apps is and even my email, is I put it in the last page of my phone in a folder. So I have to swipe to the left 3 times, then open a folder, then I can see all of those things that are there, like churning notifications. Like we get more notifications than like an air traffic controller. These days it's really insane. Like we're not meant to
Yeah.
have this much, these many notifications, and it's causing this like our nervous systems are fried because the amount of input and data that we're subjected to every day and then we put ourselves in, is that we're literally truly like frying our nervous system. That's why anxiety rates are so high. That's why depression is so high. And that's why people feel frazzled, is because we're meant to be just kind of like calmly walking through the forest, not, not just like, overwhelmed with more data than what we're designed to handle. And so, a great way to deal with that, because technology is very useful. Obviously, like we wouldn't be doing this right now with technology, is to just
Mhm.
manage them and become aware of how they're changing your behavior, what they're doing to your inner life. It's because like you're never going to be on your deathbed going like, I wish I would have checked my email a few more times. You're going to say, I wish I would have had some more connection with myself, with my friends, with my family, and accomplished things in life and contributed to our species more than just sitting around refreshing all the time. So
Yeah.
batching whenever you check those things is really valuable. Like that's what I'll do, is I'll say, okay, normally if I have, say I have 50 emails in a day or something like that, it doesn't take that long to really get through those if you have those all at once. But if you're stopping what you're doing and then going and checking in, like, okay, well, I handle these two, and I'm going to save this one as unread, and I'm going to check back on that later. And so then while you're off doing something else, you're thinking about that one. Then you come back and, okay, well, I'm going to handle this one, and now there's two more. It just turns into this crazy fragmented time suck. So with things like social media and email, if your situation allows it, um, saying like, okay, I'm going to check it twice a day for half an hour. Or if you can, say, I'm going to check it once a day for 1 hour or half an hour. Or, if you have to be on your email frequently, you could say, okay, I'll check it, once an hour for like 10 minutes, hard cutoff, whatever it is, to just make sure that you're not caught in this long, fragmentation.
Yeah, because what I'm hearing you say is that these things actually bring value into our world. Having email,
Hmm.
it's valuable. We get to have this chat because of the technology in our life. And being aware of when you're choosing to engage in those things is really important. So sometimes we have to create, I love the idea. What did you called it? The mindfulness gap?
Hmm.
So that like there has to be a step, the automatic, if I can remove that automatic step and sort of booby trap the path so that I have to choose like several paths in order to get to that destination to make sure that it's where I want to go
Yeah.
versus just somewhere that I want to go because I don't want to be present or because I'm I'm fidgeting. It's
Yeah.
basically internet fidgeting.
Yeah, totally. And that
Yeah.
mindfulness gap idea becomes so valuable in life as it deepens more. As again, just practicing some mindfulness techniques like we've been talking about, cultivating that internal space, that maps onto your entire life. So back to whenever we're talking about saying reflective, judgmental things or negative things or whatever it is, there's a
Mhm.
thing I put in my book that says, you are not your thoughts, but you are the thoughts you turn into actions. Because all of us
Say
have,
that again, Corey. That was pretty important. Say it one more time.
you're not your thoughts, you're your thoughts you put into action. Because we people often beat themselves up because they have negative thoughts. They have critical thoughts about others, themselves, and whatever. That's just a part of being human. Um, but it's all about what you do with what arises in your mind and what you choose to put out into the world. That's what builds who you are, and that's what builds your character. And ultimately, it's what builds your whole life system, because the more that you choose to put out, the positive part of yourself into the world and make good decisions and compassionate choices, choices that are good for yourself and others, the more that that's who you become in the world, and people will recognize you as that person and treat you accordingly.
Yeah. Well, that actually leads into Salima had a question that I think is a great one. And she said, so we've been talking a lot about the changes that it has for our own life, but what other areas of life have been affected and have simplified as you've been implementing these mindfulness practices, like family, nutrition, exercise? What is the ripple effect of those inner choices?
Yeah, yeah, well, it goes out to everything, because like everything in your life is touched by creating that internal space. Because, let's look at exercise. A lot of people very commonly will say, like, I want to exercise at least 5 times a week or something like that, and they end up, making kind of quote unquote decisions to not do so, or validating, or coming up with some rationalization as to why they don't have time or they don't have the energy or whatever it might be. But having that internal space, the ability to recognize, what you're thinking in the moment, allows you to go, okay, hold on a second. I'm coming up with a story as to why I can't do this, because we're meant to choose the path of least resistance. Like as animals, we're trying
Yes.
to conserve energy, and so recognizing, all right, I'm just trying to talk myself out to it. Let me change that and let me go do it. Let me go do it because I know I'll feel better later. And so
Yeah.
that's a good one there. Same thing with diet, being able to have that impulse control as opposed to just like eating, cake every night. You can say, I know I'm going to feel better. I'm going to have a more clear mind. I'm going to have more energy if I eat well. And so setting yourself up for success by deciding to and choosing to do that, as opposed to being swept away into just the automation and the blur of your, past life and your past programming, not your past life, but your previous
The life before
experience.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there's power also in visualizing that outcome, it sounds like, that there's, I want to feel good and I want to sleep well and I want to be present. So I'm going to eat this food that's going to fuel
Mhm.
my body in a healthy and nutritious way. And
Yeah.
that cause and effect, when we get so busy reacting to life, there's not much time to think about that. There's not much time to think about what happens when I make these choices because I'm so busy just trying to get from thing one to thing two.
And that's huge too in professional lives as well. You think about like, um, you can start doing something today. A lot of people don't start doing something because like, oh, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to doing, this mindfulness practice, or I'm going to get to eating better, or I'm going to start working out after the new year, or I'm going to start that entrepreneurial project next year, or whenever I'm quote unquote ready, or whatever it might be. But I think a really valuable thing from this, this topic that we're on right now, is like being able to see the big picture and realizing that in 6 months, you're going to wake up and you're going to be you in 6 months. So you can either today decide, what, I'm going to start doing something a little bit every day now. And so that in 6 months, whenever I wake up, there's a huge change that's occurred in my life, as opposed to just allowing your mind to rationalize it and put it off and put it off and put it off. And I think that, mindfulness is a great tool in that, to in being more present is a great tool to help you recognize that big picture, and you really end up doing stuff for yourself, that has a way bigger overall effect than some, small fleeting type of pleasure or distraction.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting ready for our goal setting retreat that we do every year here in Austin, and we found a lot of power. And when you go someday from now and you imagine the future and you go back to just the tiny things that you have to do today in order to make that happen, we find that most people, they overestimate what they can do in 1 year and they grossly underestimate what they can do in 5.
Right,
And
right.
what I hear you saying is some of these like inner thoughts and inner the progress we make in our inner world can actually dramatically affect that someday from now when you get to look back and see all of the progress you've made because you've allowed yourself to based on that the based on where you've made it from here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got another question that I think is a great one from Jason. And he says, any tips on tapping into mindfulness during our everyday interactions with others? It seems to be difficult for me. So
Mm,
sometimes when we're alone in our dark room or on a walk by ourselves and maybe our dog, it's easier to tap into those moments. But what about in the real world where that we're swarmed by people and distractions and meaningful relationships and some that we are just trying to get through from point A to point B?
Right, that's a really great question. So, one of the I call these little mini mindfulness moments, you know. So, um, there's all these moments. This is not in engaged with others, but just when you're within yourself out in the world, there are all these times where we have like a minute, 2 minutes, where we're kind of on hold as a person. Like you can be in line waiting for something, you can be in the elevator, you can be, someplace like that. You can be sitting waiting to take off an airplane, you can be on the bus, wherever it is, even at a red light or something in your car. You've got 2 minutes, and so there's all these little things peppered throughout the day where we have these 2 minutes, and starting to build a habit of going, okay, in those 2 minutes, I'm gonna like check into my posture, because of course all of our stress and everything is held in our bodies. And so most of us are hunched over, tight, tense shoulders, all that, breathing shallowly. And so you can say, okay, I'm in line right now waiting to get a coffee, which is a great moment. But you say, now while I'm in line, I'm going to realign my posture, I'm going to relax my shoulders, kind of stiff my chest out a little bit, get set up, and then just start checking in with your breath, taking those slow restorative breaths, and allow yourself to realign in that moment. And you get this 2 minutes of just reset real quick. And what's interesting is that as you find these little negative spaces, empty spaces in your day, where those things are possible, you start doing them automatically. So they become good habits that are built. So I do that all the time whenever I'm in line. Like before this, I was in line at the grocery store, and just, okay, find myself realigning my posture, taking some good breaths, and reconnecting. And whenever you're engaged with people, as you said, in relationship wise, one of my favorite ways of practicing mindfulness is through conversation, because you have to, well, hypothetically, you have to focus your attention on the person you're talking to, because they're saying something, you're saying something. There are two, narratives that are coming out and intertwining, and they're creating this third thing, which you're both, nourishing as you're putting it out into the world. And so really like giving yourself over to a conversation, and giving, letting go of all that other stuff around you, all those distractions, all those thoughts in the back of your head, and really just allowing yourself to just show up and be there and focus on the person that you're talking to. And then not only listening to what they're saying, but listening to where they're saying it from. Like how did this person come to be, and what perspective are they really trying to share with me? What's the big idea they're trying to get across? Are they trying to figure out what they're saying as they're saying it? There's this beautiful dance that happens during conversation. And the more that you're there with that, the more you can open up. And what's interesting is that what I found from doing hundreds and hundreds of podcasts is that what you bring to the table whenever you engage with someone else is 50% of the way that they're going to feel in your interaction, because they feel how they're going to feel, and then what you bring gives them this other feeling. So if you're open and truthful and relaxed, and you're giving them your attention and your focus, they're going to feel, oh, wait a minute, this is a safe, this is good, this is comfortable, I can open up, I want to give them my attention. And you have this much deeper connection and much more profitable interaction with another person that way. So I love conversation I actually wrote an article on it. Conversation is a form of meditation, because I love it so much.
I love that. Well, it's such a gift to both people in the conversation. Like by being present, not only do I get more, but there's a richness that you get to experience that you don't otherwise get to go there.
Absolutely.
Mindful listening, says Scott. Like that's the idea of learning how to do that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit, Corey, when you start this practice, and sometimes we stumble our way through it and we do one domino at a time, what begins to happen? How do we know that it's making an impact? You said those metrics to measure an inner goal can be harder to measure. What's going to happen in my life so that I can start to um, even just appreciate and have gratitude for how far I've come?
Yeah. So you'll notice, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. And so one thing that you'll begin to notice is that whenever you would have had a reactionary impulse to a situation, and it's funny is that you actually notice it later a lot of times in the early stages of focusing more on this. Is that if you're say you're, in a professional situation, and you're talking, and normally you might have felt a bit anxious because you're talking to, some executives or something like that, and we're thinking, oh man, I hope that this goes well, because you're in this conversation. Then you recognize that, actually, wait a second, I was totally comfortable, I wasn't anxious in that conversation. I felt like comfortable. I was present. I was aware of what I was saying. No post-event processing needed as far as like,
Yeah.
having that conversation and stepping away and be like, oh God, what did I say? Did I say this? How was that heard? Am I a terrible person? What's going on? We all do that. That's a big one with people that go to parties. You go to party, you cut loose, you have a good time, then you come home, you're like, oh no, I was terrible. I said this and I did this, and I don't think this
Hmm.
person likes me, and I hope I didn't offend that person. You know, and so stuff like that really begins to soften up. You'll find another great one that I use sometimes is like in traffic, because it's such a universal experience whenever people are driving and someone cuts them off or does something rude. You get fired up, you get irritated, and then someone will do that, and you'll just they'll cut you off, and you'll be like, oh well, that just happened, as opposed to being like, like. And you notice, you observe like the lack of fire, the lack of irritation and frustration, and that like the volume on it. Think about it like a volume knob on your stereo. It just slowly starts turning up. This quietness and this calmness and this self agency. It begins just fading into your life, and those are the little type of things you notice. You notice, and then even decisions where when you normally might not have been as authentic as you wanted to be in a situation, like, okay, I really need to speak up and voice what I'm thinking and feeling right now. You're able to do it because you have that ability to cut through the inner critic and the anxiety, and that's all softened. You're able to let your true self come out to play a little bit more.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. We've got a few more minutes left, and I want to see, are there any other questions that you listeners have? I saw there's another one from Selmia, and she says, how important is it for the rest of your family members also to implement mindfulness and meditation as well? How do you deal with partners that aren't interested?
Yeah, so that's a great one. The biggest thing I think about it can be meditation or just any information in general is that you can't make anyone learn anything that they don't want to know. People need to realize and gain the insights and the experience on their own. That's the only way that people will really stick with and embody any type of idea. So it would be wonderful if your family's on board, to join you and make it a family thing. I have a dear friend of mine has done a thing with his daughter every day since she's been alive, where he doesn't call it, not wrapping this in some of the language and the terms because those people have certain predisposed ideas about them. He doesn't even call it meditation. He says like, hey, we're gonna have our sitting time. And so he brings his daughter, him and his wife and the daughter, they go into the living room after dinner and they just sit there and they all just close their eyes and just calmly breathe for 10 minutes on the couch. And then, okay, that's our sitting time. And she's just grown up with that. And now she loves it and she looks forward to it. And so she's been meditating her whole life without even really realizing it. And it does, wonderful things to their family. So if the family's into it, that's wonderful, but they don't have to be. But what can happen is that if you practice it by yourself, privately, then the beautiful byproduct of that is that you'll lead by example. They'll see you having more presence. You can feel someone who's more present. You can really feel it. It's an animal connection, an animal type of instinct that we have. Just like you can feel someone if you're in a subway in New York and someone gets on the train and you're like, ooh, that person, no eye contact. They're stressed. They're they're on the edge right now. They're not looking good. They're frustrated. They look angry. Just you can feel that. You can feel calmness and presence just as the way that you can feel someone who's on the edge or something like that. And so by leading and bringing that type of presence into your life, others will go, hey, that looks pretty good. Like they seem pretty happy and pretty connected and pretty deep. I think I want to do that. And that's a great way that you can live by example, and your family will oftentimes begin joining you because they want to get in on what they see changing in you.
Yeah, that's great. Jason says, a major hurdle of mine is that is feeling like I'm not being taken advantage of or trodden upon when I'm doing my best to open up and be compassionate towards others. Any advice on this?
Oh, yes, that's another wonderful, wonderful question. Most of the time, people feel or get the misconception that compassion is kind of being a doormat and that you open up because someone who's trying to be compassionate does get the big picture. They see outside of themselves, and that's why they choose to try and be kind and be positive in the world. But what happens oftentimes is that whenever you do open up and you're trying to kind of take on and let things slide, and like, okay, like this person's being rude to me, or they're kind of taking advantage of me, but they clearly don't know any better. I recognize what's going on. I'm going to let it kind of move out in the flow and, not worry about it. And I'm going to kind of be the quote unquote bigger person and let that slide. That's is wonderfully intentioned, but it very quickly leads to resentment and frustration and things like that, or feeling taken advantage of. So thinking about compassion and that openness as an intention as opposed to an identity or something like that, becomes very valuable. So you can show up in that conversation with your intention and your instinct to be more compassionate, to be more open. But whenever you begin to feel like you're being taken advantage of, it's crucial to set boundaries for yourself. And the second that you
Yeah.
feel that, this is the way to, keep from getting into that resentment state, in that frustration, that feeling taken advantage of state, is to show up, wanting to be open, wanting to be connected. Whenever you feel that advantage or that taking advantage thing come, then set that boundary and then actually verbalize that and communicate that. And that's how you are able to stay open, to stay, well intentioned with your connection. But then as things start shifting a certain way, bring that into communication to where that way you're still serving yourself at the same time.
That was awesome. I was feeling some compassion for some visitors that just came in. So as you were talking, I was thinking about. So this is
Hey,
Jeff Woods, and who's this? Who's this? They came to visit and say hi,
all
and
right.
talking
Happy Halloween.
about having compassion and how do you show compassion, open up, so that.
That's what we talk about at my school.
Amazing.
Okay,
We'll let you guys
Okay,
get
thank
your
you,
one
thank
thing.
you.
Bye.
I think Jeff's been working out.
Jeff
Yeah,
has been working out.
he looks ripped.
He's super ripped. Uh, Thanks for that. I think sometimes you're right. There's a misconception that when we show compassion for others, that we have to self-sacrifice something, our needs, and some things that we need in order to give to others. And I think it's once you start practicing that compassion and practicing those boundaries is when you start to find the true meaning of it and the true
Yeah, totally.
experience.
Totally. And it's almost actually inevitable, but kind of
Yeah,
because what I was talking about is, that when you open the door, there's an orientation period and it's kind of inevitable for that to happen. So if do feel that, it's not a fail, it's step one. And then step two is
yeah.
learning when to put up those boundaries. And step three is the communication.
Rodrigo asked a great question. What's the one thing that we haven't asked you that we should?
Hmm. Where you can buy Now is the Way.
It's a great, that was on my list. I have to say, Corey and our listeners, this book is a really remarkable book. And I rarely binge order multiple books for so many people in my life when a new book comes out. And this book I've already sent to many people in my life because it's relevant in many seasons of life. I think
Hmm.
that I have, for myself, when I read it, I felt very heard and seen, and I have a direct prescriptive path on how to start taking action in my life. And for people that are going through transitions, it's a great book.
Oh,
For
that's
anyone
beautiful.
who's curious, it's an amazing book and it's beautiful with so many good, so many good like one-liners that I feel like just hit me so hard I had to stop and read it multiple times.
Awesome.
So
Thank you so much. I really
thank you.
appreciate
So where
that.
can they get Now Is the Way?
Well, okay, so first I want to give a real answer and then I'll
Okay,
tell.
okay.
So the real answer is like, the idea of being present is such a nebulous, ephemeral type of idea, right? But we all know it. We've all lived it. We've all felt it, at least in some small snapshots in our life. But how can we build it into our lives? It's like saying, how can you build a good day into your calendar? It feels a little weird, right? Like, well, they just kind of show up, right? But one of the thing that I open the book with is a way to feel present every morning is by instead of I mentioned coffee because I love coffee, and that's whenever you wake up and you're going to have your morning coffee, as opposed to just chugging that coffee down or drinking on the way to work, actually taking a moment to pause, sip it in, feel it going into your mouth, feeling the warmth, really tasting it, feeling the vapors, feeling the blood vessels in your head expand, feeling the shift in your consciousness and the lights get brighter, feeling that whole change and really just being there with that experience and allowing all of your attention, all of your focus on one singular thing for that moment. That really sets a tone and brings you back to, okay, here I am in my body, in this life right now, every morning. And you get this almost this kind of kiss from the universe every morning of like, there's the place. Now let's go start the day from that place, as opposed to starting it from, I got lampshade on and one pant leg and half lipstick and, running out the door like that.
I think that's great. It's a great insight because I think, like you said, if you can start your day off with that one thing, then everything else becomes easier or unnecessary.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, where can they find this amazing book?
They can go to nowstheway.com. It's there, all whatever way you want to digest it, it's there on that site. Or of course, it's on Amazon. They have the audiobook and the hardcover. And I read the audiobook, which was quite a privilege to do. And so most people find my voice calming, so you can hear it for 5 or 6 hours. If you get the audiobook.
What I love about our conversation that I'm still processing is that on your journey to mindfulness, like there are so many things you could do. And for you, our listeners, what's the one thing that you've been taking from all of these amazing suggestions that you can start today? Why don't you put it in the question box so we can read it? Because I'm curious. For me, the biggest thing is that I can give myself permission to the moment that find myself noticing that I'm not in the moment. That's actually a win for me
Total
because I'm
win.
starting that practice of quieting the noise
Yeah.
to take inventory of what's happening versus just running through all the things and trying to get them done in order to then earn that moment. Because I think
Yeah.
that my processing is such that I have the big list of my highest priorities, and that maybe sometimes I misinterpret that I only get this quiet moment once I've finished all those other things.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
by taking that moment first, I actually make space for so many other things.
Absolutely. And also being kind to yourself. It's like if you think about how mean and rough we are on ourselves whenever we get, whenever we feel like we're failing or we're doing something wrong or we get overwhelmed or whatever, and you start thinking, I'm such an idiot or whatever, or like, I don't look right now. Something's wrong with me,
Yeah.
whatever. It's like you wouldn't think about that. You wouldn't say that to a friend, So why would you say it to yourself? Be your own friend, like take it easy and allow
Yeah.
yourself like, all right, there was that. Next, let's move on and onwards and
Mhm.
upwards.
Absolutely. So, from you, our audience, I've got just be cool, be in the moment, awareness is a win, prioritize you, and set some time to meditate. Breathe like I'm sleeping. Breathing is such an important centering activity for me. I'm encouraged to time block meditation every day. Extreme noticing so that I appreciate the moment. My latest focus is an instrument of presence in connection with others, taking 5 minutes every morning to be still. These are awesome. I'm glad
Mhm.
that this has been value for you. And if you want more value, this book is full of small bits of wisdom and practical ways to start taking action in your life. So thank you for writing it. Thank you for taking the time, Corey. And we appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, and just thank you for reading the list of things that people listening took away from this. That actually gave me goosebumps just hearing that
Oh,
our
there's
conversation could.
there's even more. It's good. It's rich. And I just the richness that I'm seeing here, I just can't wait for you guys to go implement all those things.
Awesome. Well, I'm really grateful for everyone watching and listening to this, and I'm grateful for people that have taken any of this stuff into their lives and felt any small amount of change. It's an honor, to be able to be a part of that. And thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. And if you're like me and you were listening to a lot of things and you wanted to hear it again, I will send you the recap so there'll be a replay and you can also share it with friends. So thank you. And we'll see you next month for next month's webinar. Thanks, Corey.
Thank you.
I actually don't know if I know how to end this webinar though. Oh.
Well, we can keep
Okay.
going.